What's the darkest side of humanity you've ever seen?
Experience 1. I worked in community care. A patient, let's call him John, not his real name, I looked after was a schizophrenic who had spent most of his life in institutions, but was now living in the community with a dedicated team. His illness was such that he had no way of discerning thoughts or dreams from reality. It was all the same to him. Like a lot of people with his condition, he grew up being predated upon by all those around him, but mostly his alcoholic father, who would R-word him on a regular basis. He was in his early 50s when I met him, a seriously damaged man, but also a lovable character when you got to know him. When he went to bed at night, the nightmares would begin and you'd hear him crying and screaming in his sleep, "No, Daddy, no." The abuse was never in the past for him, it was always there in his head, as real as everything else. One day I was sitting alone with him in the car, and he started talking to me. He wanted to get something off his chest. When his dad died, the whole family, who were terrified of him, were sitting in the house with him. His dad started having a heart attack, and pretty soon it became obvious to the rest of the family. No one spoke, they just all sat there as the father struggled and gasped for help, but no one would get up to help him. They all just sat in silence and watched him die. John was crying when he asked me if he'd done something wrong. I reassured him he hadn't. Experience 2. Not me, but my cousin, a U.S. Marine, was in Kosovo during the ethnic cleansing. He has never been the same. Since leaving the Marines, has not been able to hold a job. Before he left, he was lighthearted and hilarious. Now, he's like a shell of his former self. Experience 3. A bit late to the party, but here's mine. I work as a firefighter paramedic. One of my worst calls was for a disturbance between and wife and the husband. He was hitting her, while drunk as hell, and they were both so belligerent we couldn't figure out what was wrong till the wife started to finally make words instead of screaming, and she said, "He killed my baby." We didn't know there was a child in the house. We hadn't even been in the house. We run inside and find the child in the crib. He drowned it by pouring paint over it. Like buckets and buckets and buckets of paint. We tried CPR, but it was no use, and the child was pronounced at the hospital. The origin of the taking a life and assault? She refused to give the drunk man a BJ. He killed their child for a BJ. Experience 4. ER doctor here. I once saw a 2-year-old child. He was the cutest boy I've ever seen. Green eyes, long curly blonde hair, and a very cheerful personality. Everybody in the ER loved him. Apparently, his parents left him without any food or water. They went on a vacation. A neighbor heard him crying and called the police. They broke in, found the boy, and took him to the ER. He was beaten up. There was blood dripping from his left ear. There were multiple other old wounds all around his body. And still, he just wanted to play with me. He just wanted some love. He tried to hold my hand. I broke down and called my senior to continue examining him. I have seen teenage self-deletions, homicides, all kinds of crap. But this broke something inside of me. Experience 5. In college, we have required units dedicated to community work. Opted in for the one where you teach stuff to underprivileged/understaffed public schools. I was going to teach basic bio/science and crap, majored in biology. Turned out I was going to teach basic English, and it turned out my students would be adult women. Age ranges from early 20s to 50s. Apparently, they were all part of this program to rehabilitate and try to reintroduce abused women to society. Most of them had severe PTSD. No cognitive disabilities or anything, but some of them can barely speak my native tongue cause of the PTSD. Some of them were so unresponsive. I didn't get all the details of what they went through, but I think crap was so bad they became essentially mute. Experience 6. Saw a security camera footage of a gas station robbery. The masked thief held the cashier at gunpoint. The clerk was very calm and handed over the money from the register and followed all instructions the robber gave him. Then the robber hopped over the counter and told the cashier to get on the ground. The man complied and was on his knees getting ready to lay down, and then this piece of crap just executed him on the spot. No sudden movement, full compliance, calm behavior, none of it mattered. No clue if the thief was ever caught. Experience 7. Probably a lot less screwed up than some of the other stories here. My mother was abused by my grandfather for years when she was a little girl. He never went to prison for it because she really didn't have any other family left, and my grandfather's family, it's a very long story, basically gaslit my mom into not testifying or pressing charges. Decades later, my mom has basically moved in and is trying not to dwell on it. He visits our house for Christmas. We pick him up together, and it's okay, no big deal. If you forget what he did, he's just this nice, albeit annoyingly incapable old man. No problems over Christmas break, although he's a handful because he's 82. My mom decided to drive him back alone. On the way back, they discussed that topic. He basically dismissed it and said,
"I don't know why you're complaining. You enjoyed it."
She was 7 at the time. I am thankful I wasn't in the car, because I'd be in jail for taking a life right now. I would have strangled the life out of that old man. That's such a screwed up thing to say. That's so evil. Experience 8. The day after Christmas sale at a major department store. The gift wrap was half price. A woman keeled over onto the floor with what appeared to be a heart attack. People continued shopping over the top of her legs. Store employees had to form a circle around her to try to get her blocked off from the crowd. The ambulance crew had to nearly fight their way through the crowd to get to her. No one would move. The rescue attempt took far longer than it should have. Even when she was on the gurney being taken out, people were still shoving the crew. Experience 9. Any genocide memorial in Rwanda, they have a couple where they kept the corpses as they were found. Horrific. I was shown a large brown stain on a wall and informed that this wall was where they swung infants to end them by bashing their brains. I still cannot fathom that 100,000 people were butchered in the space of a month and a half by a hand machete. This seems to have blown up overnight, so a few things. As many people have rightly pointed out, it was even more horrifying that 800,000 people, not 100,000 people, who were killed in the space of a month and a half. The Rwandan genocide took place in April 1994, and the main news event of the day at the time was the death of Kurt Cobain, not the proudest thing I remember at that time to be honest. For anyone who wants to learn more about the background and events leading up to it, some popular resources are books. We wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be dead. Paul Gurevich. Shake hands with the devil. Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian UN military general who was a horrified bystander to the slaughter and who seems to be haunted by events he was unable to prevent. There's a documentary with this title as well, but I would avoid the movie, to be honest, as the documentary is far more powerful. Popular movies Hotel Rwanda, and a book by the same name about a spark of hope in Kigali. And finally, I'd recommend looking up the Offos Trust, a rel apolitical group set up to prevent genocide. They were one of the supporters of the main genocide memorial in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. It seems more relevant now than ever that we don't generationally forget to repeat the same mistakes. And for anyone who might be put off from visiting the country, don't. The post-genocide recovery was amazing, and the country, barring its tragic past, is one of the safest places to visit in Africa. The kids go to school, there's universal health care, and the younger generation speaks English. It's not a democracy, but given where the society was not too long ago, it's remarkable. Experience 10. There was this one woman with her daughter who lived around my neighborhood. She used to pimp herself out in order to feed her daughter and herself. Well, when she got old and wasn't attractive enough for the business to make a lot of money, she decided to start pimping out her 13 to 14-year-old daughter to old dude for money. I know it's tame compared to other stories, but it's screwed up, and what's even more screwed up is how often things like that happen. And other than that, all the cartel videos are some of the other sides of the darkest stuff humanity has to offer. Experience 11. I was visiting family in Cambodia. We had a ceremony in my wife's village, and during it, I was told an old friend couldn't make it because he didn't feel well. We decided to pack up some food to bring to him. I had gotten used to the style house there, so it was a surprise to find a single house Western style. White picket fence, kids toy on the lawn, garden. Sticks out like a sore thumb. We were actually going across the street to the ditch. Bamboo and mosquito nets were haphazardly thrown around. Dirty dishes everywhere, a chicken in a much too small cage, garbage. In the middle was a skeleton with skin over it. I couldn't believe a human still moves and talks in that state. He almost looked like a movie puppet. He spoke about his pending death and what his body will allow that day. Out popped an elderly woman who chimes and she will not be far behind him. She shows off what looks like a pregnant belly. It's from hepatitis. I was obviously taken aback by people willingly passing away in a ditch. I asked if they had a family. My wife said yes and pointed to the Western-style house. The owner was watering his lawn at that point. He smiled and waved at us. We waved back. It took the old man 3 weeks from that point to die, in the ditch, across from his son watching TV on his couch. Experience 12. When I was 10 years old, my babysitter, a female 16-year-old, died in a traffic accident. She was also my neighbor's daughter. My neighbor, the girl's mom, was of course heartbroken. Since the girl who died was a popular girl, the address was in the newspaper, so people knew where to send their respect letters. On the night of the condolence ceremony, burglars broke into my neighbor's home and stole whatever they could find, including stuff from her daughter who had just died. After finding out what happened, I developed a very dark and disgusted view of humanity from a young age. Experience 13. I'm an attorney and I worked for about 3 years representing parents whose children had been taken away by the state. Most of the work was, unfortunately, routine. But one morning I was appointed to represent a father at an initial hearing. His 4 children had been taken from him and his wife. During the course of the hearing, I learned that the allegations against my client were that he got angry with his youngest daughter, she was about 4, her birthday was 1 day before my son's, and kicked her in the stomach while wearing steel-toed work boots so hard that her small intestine was perforated by her spine. That, in and of itself, was horrible, but I wouldn't remember the case if it wasn't for what happened next. The parents loaded their 5 children into their vehicle and went garage sale shopping. They said their youngest, who had been kicked, was quiet and didn't want to get out of the car when they stopped. After about 4 or 5 hours, the mom realized the child was running a very high fever and needed medical attention. The father, my client, decided to go to some more garage sales instead of getting medical attention for the child. Finally, after she wouldn't wake up after they had been to a garage sale, he decided to take her to the hospital. They ran tests and rushed her into surgery to repair the damage to the bowel, and she passed away a few hours after getting out of surgery. She apparently died from a massive infection. My client tried to tell the doctors that she had fallen on the edge of a bed. The clear boot mark on her stomach belied that version of his story. After that hearing was ended, and the CPS worker testifying cried on the stand, that was something I had never seen, I walked directly to the office, into my boss' office, and told him to either reassign me or I was quitting. Experience 14. I used to work the nightlife scene. I saw a fair number of fights and other messed up stuff, but the worst for me wasn't even graphic exactly, it was just traumatizing. I had a 15-minute conversation at 6 a.m. with a date R-word victim who was trying to get her phone and purse back from the bar she remembered being at the night before. All she could remember was getting a drink and blacking out. She woke up in some guy's bed and ended up going to the ER and having a R-word kit done, then had to go to the bar to try and find her stuff. Experience 15. When I was a kid, I was in state care for a couple of years and got sent to a lot of inpatient and residential facilities. I saw and experienced a lot of terrible things. The worst was a girl who was probably 10 to 11 at the time and had terrible scars. I assumed she was probably a cutter. I overheard staff talking about her one day, and while yes, she did self-harm, most of those scars were from her parents. They would cut her to punish her when she was really little. I guess one time they went too far and almost killed her, and someone found her and took her to the hospital. I think it was like a neighbor, but I don't remember exactly. She seemed really mature for her age and relatively normal. She was really nice, and despite being several years younger than me, I liked hanging out with her. Someone asked her about it once, and she said it wasn't a big deal because she was so young when it happened, she didn't even remember. One day she had a major meltdown after her caseworker visited. Heard staff saying that one of her parents had been released and was trying to get some kind of visitation or custody or something like that. I guess the caseworker was obligated to inform her. From the way they talked, there was literally zero chance of it ever happening, but the poor kid had a complete breakdown. I actually never saw her again after it happened, and I never heard staff talk about her again, so I don't know how things ended. I think about her surprisingly often and still feel intense distress when I do. There were also a lot of littles that social workers would bring, usually in the middle of the night, because there was nowhere else to take them. I ended up rooming with them or them hanging on me a lot because the staff felt like I was appropriate to be around them. A lot of the girls would try to be kind of weird, idealized mother figures towards the kids, and I did not. I asked about that once and was told most of the girls didn't have healthy parental figures, and it was kind of like a fantasy thing for them, like what they'd wished their mother had been like. It's been like 20 years since I met some of them, and many for less than a day, but I kept all the pictures they drew for me. A lot of them even say "I love you" on it. I didn't like that they clung to me so much, but it felt like it was really important to them, so I just kept all the pictures even though they probably don't even remember me now. Now that I am a parent, all those kids really break my heart. I feel guilty that I didn't do more for them. I mean, realistically, I was a teen and pretty severely traumatized myself, so I couldn't have done more than the time I give them hugs, sit in my lap, and let them steal my bed. They'd try to crawl into bed with me, and I'd sneak out of bed when they fell back asleep because I was really uncomfortable but didn't know what else to do. Experience 16. When I lived in Harlem, New York, I was hopelessly addicted to heroin. The way they sell it up north, it comes packaged in bundles of little envelopes with stamps on them to signify which batch the dope was from. At some point, dealers started spiking the H with fentanyl. If someone died of a particular bag, all the junkies, including myself, would rush to find out what the stamp was and who was selling the stamp so we could go get that specific dope. The theory was that if someone died from it, then it was strong and good. This was the insanity of the disease of addiction, which I thrived in for quite some time. Saw a lot of friends crash and burn. Experience 17. I know this pales in comparison to all the screwed up stuff in the thread, but I once heard some weird noises from a dumpster, opened it, and found inside a plastic bag 6 dog puppies, all cold as hell and pretty much passed out except the smallest one, who kept wailing and wailing. Took them out into a vet, and he basically told me, "Nah mate, they're done for." Took them home and put them in a basket with blankets and stuff. They died one after the other in a couple of days, the smallest being the last one to go. It is freaking broke my heart, and I don't even like dogs. I can sort of understand, for a very narrow definition of understanding, how hatred can bring people to do horrible things to other people, but this... You could have solved it in a dozen different ways, without spending a dime and wasting maybe 2 hours of your life, but you chose this? What the hell are you? Experience 18. A girl in the middle school I went to was R-worded by 2 guys. They never faced any consequences. Multiple girls in the high school I went to were forced into doing explicit stuff with the PE teacher. Again, he faced no consequences. When I became a teacher later on, 2 of my students died of drug overdose. When my brother was in high school, one of his classmates was killed. Supposedly 5 to 6 people were involved, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict any of them. That boy's family has been wrecked by it. That's way too much to remember for one day. Experience 19. My stepdad was a bad person, but he was bad at it. He even tried to create his own gang, but everyone that he tried to recruit was a lot more dangerous than he was. Some of them agreed to be a part of it, but you could always tell it had the same air as a big brother patting his younger sibling on the head and telling them they're doing a good job. As a kid watching all this unfold, there were times I'd be embarrassed by him, not just because he was attempting to do horrible things, but because he did them in such a childish way. But there was a chain of events that seemed to flip all of it around. My grandfather ran a tattoo shop out of his home and usually accepted different drugs as payment, so there were a lot of shady people hanging around. My stepdad always put on this machismo show when we'd go over there and pretended he ran the place. He was always loud, saying stupid things, and running around acting tough. But there was this one guy who came for a tattoo. He had bodyguards and the whole vibe of everyone changed immediately. Even my stepdad sat down and was silent the entire time. I was put in another room but could still feel how tense everyone was. It was strange. He wasn't even a scary-looking guy. Tall, pretty skinny, dressed normally, but wore these cowboy boots with giant spurs. He even had the hat to match it. He hung around for a couple of hours, got a tattoo, and left. But on the way out he noticed that someone had stolen some rims out of the back of his truck and demanded that they figure it out or he would. My grandfather had cameras everywhere, so we were easily able to find who it was. Just some dude who came over semi-empty and was always stealing whatever he could pawn. When he showed up next, it was about 10 p.m. on a school night, but I was brought along anyhow. My stepdad and a couple of other guys beat him for well over 3 hours. The things I saw, heard, and smelled have stayed with me. They broke his legs, let a dog maul him, beat him with bats, split his skull, and broke as many ribs as they could. There was blood, vomit, and his feces everywhere in the room. He lived, somehow, but was in the hospital for the better part of a year. The weird thing is that about 2 years later my stepdad R-worded me, but I never have nightmares about that. All my nightmares are about this night. Their laughter was sadistic and stuck really well in my mind. But the sounds he made, gurgling and all, are what really bothered me. He sounded like a dying animal, which I guess he was, but when the hope slipped away from him it was crushing.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.